Jude walked briskly through the city streets, her footfalls a muted rhythm against the rain-slicked pavement. Her eyes never rested, darting from shadow to shadow, scanning faces and uniforms with equal suspicion. The invisible weight of her sister's photograph pressed against her chest from its hiding place in her inner pocket, a constant reminder of why each step mattered, why each breath she took needed to count. She kept to the edges of the thoroughfare, a habit formed through necessity rather than choice. Those who stood out disappeared. Those who looked too long at the wrong things vanished. Those who looked trans, gay, autistic, or whatever the hell, just different. Those who remembered too loudly or read a forbidden book were never heard from, no trial, no procedure, just poof. Gone. The propaganda posters loomed from every available surface, their edges curling in the perpetual damp that seemed to seep into everything these days. A stern face stared down at her from the nearest wall, the premier's tight-lipped visage rendered in stark black and red, eyes that followed no matter which way you moved. A vomit-making moron. That's what everyone who was not brainwashed thought. They hated him and his cronies. Unity through conformity, declared the slogan beneath his chin, the words dripping like a threat. Beside it, a newer poster showed a family, a man, a woman, and two well-scrubbed children, all with identical vacant smiles. Deviance is disease, it warned in letters that seemed to throb against the white background. Report symptoms for treatment. Jude's gaze slid away, but not before her mind replaced the image with another, of streets once lined with rainbow banners, of crowds marching with pride and purpose, their faces lit with genuine joy, and freedom of thought rather than the manufactured happiness now mandated by law. Those memories carried a tinge of unreality now, like something she'd dreamt rather than lived. 5 years. It had been only 5 years since the Traditional Values Coalition had seized power during the economic collapse, 5 years since the laws had changed overnight, and 5 years since the word purification had entered everyday speech. She remembered how quickly the brighter colors had vanished, first from official buildings, then shop fronts, then homes. People learned quickly what was safe and what invited scrutiny. Her sister, Eliza, hadn't learned quickly enough. Jude's pace slowed involuntarily as the street curved and the re-education center came into view. The building itself was unremarkable, formerly a community hospital before the regime's architects had reimagined its purpose. Now, its windows were blacked out, and the grounds were surrounded by concrete walls topped with razor wire that glinted dully in the gray afternoon light. Her stomach twisted, a physical reaction she could never quite control. Her hands clenched into fists, nails biting into her palms with a pain that anchored her to the present moment. The muscles in her throat constricted, making each breath a conscious effort. A man in the black uniform of the moral authority stood at the entrance, his posture unnaturally straight, face impassive beneath his peaked cap. A gun rested against his hip, worn openly as both tool and symbol. Jude forced her eyes forward, keeping her expression neutral through practiced effort. The re-education centers had sprung up like toxic mushrooms across the city. Places where those deemed morally compromised could be reformed, reclaimed, and returned to society as productive citizens. At least, that was the official line repeated on the nightly broadcasts. In reality, many who entered never emerged again, becoming instead regrettable failures who couldn't be saved despite the state's benevolent efforts. Like Eliza. The memory washed over Jude with painful clarity, her sister standing in their shared flat, wrists bloody from where she'd torn off the identification bracelet all gender non-conforming individuals had been ordered to wear. Her eyes, like Jude's own, were fierce with a determination bordering on mania. "I won't live marked," she'd said, voice steady despite everything. "I won't pretend. Not even to survive this." Jude had pleaded, had reasoned, had screamed herself hoarse. But Eliza had walked out the next morning, bare-wristed and defiant, to join a last desperate protest in Memorial Square. The crowd had been small, fear had already taken root by then, but the authorities' response had been swift and methodical. A friend had called Jude later that day. "They've taken her to North District Center," he'd whispered, before hanging up. The phone line was disconnected the following week. For 2 months, Jude had stood in queues outside the center, alongside others seeking information about loved ones inside. For 2 months, she'd been told that Eliza was responding well to treatment and would rejoin society once properly rehabilitated. Then one morning, a different clerk had checked the system and frowned. "Patient E2476 is no longer at this facility," she'd said without looking up. "No further information is available." Her body was not returned. No death certificate issued. Just erased, as though Eliza had never existed at all. Poof again. Jude forced her feet to keep walking past the center, though each step felt weighted. Her heartbeat punched against her ribs, too loud in her ears. Sweat prickled along her spine despite the chill in the air. Fear had become such a constant companion that she barely recognized it as a separate emotion anymore. It was simply part of existing, like breathing or blinking. Yet beneath that fear ran a current of something darker, something that frightened her more than the authority ever could. Rage. Pure and sustaining. It simmered in her blood, a low, constant heat bubbling that never quite cooled, no matter how dangerous it might be. That rage had driven her to join the underground, to learn the new codes and signals, to memorize safe houses and escape routes. To carry messages hidden in everyday items, to distribute the forbidden literature that reminded people of what had been lost. Small acts of resistance that might, someday, form part of something larger. A surveillance drone hummed overhead, its camera eye swiveling to track movement in the street. Jude didn't look up. Looking up suggested guilt, suggested you had something to hide. Instead, she adjusted her scarf against the cold and continued her steady pace, allowing herself to blend into the sparse afternoon foot traffic. She turned down a narrower side street, away from the main thoroughfare with its watchful electronic eyes. The buildings here were older, predating the regime, their facades crumbling from neglect. Resources went to new construction now, wide avenues for military parades, vast administrative complexes, the premier's grand residence on the hill overlooking the city. The key to her flat weighed heavily in her pocket. After Eliza disappeared, Jude had been reassigned to smaller accommodation, more appropriate for a single occupant, according to the housing authority. The real reason, of course, was to place her among others who had been similarly tainted by association, where they could be more easily monitored. Jude climbed the worn steps to her building, nodding to the elderly man who served as the block's warden. His roomy eyes followed her with the dull curiosity of someone with little left to lose. He wouldn't report her comings and goings to the authority, not out of loyalty or shared ideology, but from a bone-deep weariness that had rendered him largely indifferent to the world around him. He felt he was too old for this shit. The lift had been out of order for months. Jude climbed the 5 flights of stairs, her footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Each landing had a propaganda poster, the same ones as outside, but faded from time and the building's perpetual damp. Someone had scratched through the premier's eyes on the 3rd-floor poster, an act of petty vandalism that could earn a month in a work camp if the culprit were discovered. Her flat door was exactly as she'd left it that morning, the nearly invisible thread still stretched between the door handle and the frame, untouched. Inside, the air was still and cold. The heating came on for 4 prescribed hours each day, never quite enough to drive away the chill that seemed to have seeped into the walls themselves. Jude shrugged off her coat, hung it on the hook by the door, and stood for a moment in the silence. Outside was noise and danger and constant vigilance. Here, at least, she could let her guard down fractionally. Not completely, never completely, but enough to breathe a little deeper, to let her shoulders drop from their perpetual tension. The flat was small, but hers. A sanctuary of sorts, though even that word felt dangerous in her mind. Sanctuaries could be violated. Homes could be searched. Privacy was a privilege that could be revoked with frightening ease. And you wouldn't have a leg to stand on literally. Still, she had made it back safely one more day. And tomorrow, she would rise and do it all again, carrying her sister's memory like a flame that refused to be extinguished. "Feck she laughed, albeit in a quiet tone. Jude moved through her flat like a ghost, her steps measured and silent from years of practice. No noise meant no one asking stupid questions. The shadows stretched long across the worn floorboards, cast by the meager light filtering through the half-drawn curtains. Even here, within these four walls, caution was second nature, a reflex as natural as breathing. She paused, listening to the building's familiar creaks and groans, cataloging each sound against the mental inventory of what was normal and what was safe. Whatever the hell normal was these days, she had no idea. A pipe knocked somewhere in the walls. The neighbor above shuffled across their floor. The distant hum of a patrol vehicle passing on the street below. All expected. All ordinary. All a pain in the neck. Only then did she move toward the corner of her bedroom, where an unremarkable chest of drawers stood against the wall. It had come with the flat, cheap government-issue furniture, identical to thousands of others across the city. Not even as posh as IKEA would have had, she ran her fingers along the worn edge, feeling for the slight imperfection in the wood that marked the right spot. When she found it, she pressed firmly. A soft click rewarded her effort as a hidden panel in the side of the chest swung inward. The gap was small, barely large enough for her hand to slip through, but it was enough. Jude glanced over her shoulder, a pointless gesture in an empty flat, but hey-ho, yet she couldn't stop herself, before reaching inside. Her fingers found the cloth bundle by touch alone. She withdrew it carefully, cradling it in her palms like something infinitely fragile. In many ways, it was. Discovery of these items would mean immediate arrest, perhaps worse. They were relics of a forbidden past, evidence of moral corruption according to the current laws. To Jude, they were all that remained of her sister. She unwrapped the bundle on her bed, movements deliberate and reverent. First came the photograph, Eliza at 23, her hair cropped short in defiance of gender norms even before the regime took power. Her smile was lopsided, one corner of her mouth lifting higher than the other, a genetic quirk she'd shared with their mother. Around her neck hung a rainbow pendant, visible despite the fading of the image. Jude had taken the picture herself, on Eliza's birthday, just 8 months before the coalition seized control. Next was the pendant itself, rescued from their old flat after Eliza's disappearance, before the authorities had sealed it. The chain was broken now, the metal tarnished, but the colors remained bright against her palm. Beside it lay Eliza's notebook, its cover worn from handling, pages filled with her messy handwriting, poetry and thoughts and observations of a world that had been changing even then, though none of them had understood how quickly or completely. Last was a strip of fabric, torn from the banner Eliza had carried to that final protest. Jude had found it weeks later, discarded in a back alley near Memorial Square, trampled and mud-stained but unmistakable. She'd washed it carefully, the colors running slightly but still recognizable. These items formed the core of this memory box. Still, there were others, a ticket stub from the last film they'd seen together, a pressed flower from a bouquet Eliza had received from her girlfriend, and a birthday card with Eliza's distinctive handwriting sprawled inside. Small things, meaningless to anyone else, but to Jude, they were anchors to a truth the regime tried daily to erase. She arranged them carefully on the thin blanket covering her bed, positioning each item with precision born of repetition. This ritual, performed whenever she felt her courage waning or her anger dulling, was both remembrance and renewal. In a world where the past was constantly rewritten, memory became an act of resistance. She was determined that this would never be erased. Jude knelt beside the bed, her knees pressing into the hard floor. The discomfort was part of the ritual, too, a reminder that comfort and safety were luxuries no longer guaranteed. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the photograph before gently touching the edge of the image, tracing her sister's face. "They're stepping up the patrols near the university district," she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the silent room. 3 more arrests yesterday. Students who were handing out those pamphlets we printed last month. She spoke to the photograph as though Eliza might answer or offer advice or encouragement. In the early days after her disappearance, Jude had felt foolish doing this, but now it seemed as natural as breathing. Perhaps it was madness, this one-sided conversation with a memory. Perhaps it was the only sane response to an insane world. "I'm being careful, though," she continued. "Just like you never were." The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Eliza had been incapable of caution, even when the laws first changed. While others had hidden their identities, Eliza had stood taller. While friends had removed their pride pins and rainbow badges, she'd worn hers more prominently. If we hide now, she'd argued, we'll never stop hiding. Jude had called her reckless then. Now, she wondered if her sister had simply understood, before any of them, that compromise would never be enough for the new regime, that the choice was always going to be between complete surrender or complete resistance. You were right, Jude whispered, her voice catching. About so many things. Eliza had been the brave one, the fierce one. The sister who'd stood up to schoolyard bullies when they were children, who'd defended friends and strangers alike with the same unwavering conviction. She'd been the first to come out in their family, blazing a trail that had made Jude's own journey easier. She'd organized protests, support groups, and community events, building connections that had become the foundation of the current underground, even though the organization was sparse because of fear. Something had to change, others must be out there. Jude traced the rainbow pendant in the photograph. The network is growing, but not fast enough, fear is hindering its evolution, she murmured. Slowly, but it's happening. We've got people in 3 more government departments now. And a doctor at the Western District Center who's smuggling out information. She leaned closer to the image, as though sharing a secret too dangerous even for the empty room. We're documenting everything, Liz. Every disappearance, every re-education victim, every execution disguised as a treatment failure. When this regime falls, and it will fall, there will be records. There will be evidence. There will be justice. The word hung in the air, heavy with promise and vengeance. Justice. Such a simple concept, rendered revolutionary by its absence. Jude's fingers curled around the rainbow pendant, the metal warming against her skin. Her head bowed, forehead nearly touching the photograph. When she spoke again, her voice had transformed from conversation to vow. I promise you, Eliza. I will not stop until they're held accountable. For you, for all of us, they've taken. I promise you won't be forgotten. I promise your death, if you are dead, won't be meaningless. Her voice cracked on the last word. The possibility that Eliza might still be alive somewhere, locked in some secret facility, enduring who knew what horrors, haunted Jude's darkest moments. But hope, in this case, felt crueler than acceptance. Better to assume death than to imagine ongoing suffering. She could not let her mind travel that dark road. I'm afraid, she admitted in a whisper so soft it barely disturbed the air. Every day. But I'm still here. Still fighting. Because you taught me how. The confession of fear and doubt lifted something from her shoulders. The regime demanded certainty and absolute conviction. Admitting weakness, even to oneself, became an act of defiance against their manufactured reality. Jude remained kneeling, eyes closed, breathing in the silence of the room. She allowed herself to remember Eliza's laugh, loud and unrestrained, nothing like the careful, measured expressions of emotion now deemed appropriate. She recalled her sister's passion when discussing politics, literature, or music, how her hands would move in expansive gestures, punctuating her points, and the way she'd throw her head back when something struck her as particularly absurd. These memories were dangerous treasures, hoarded against the regime's determination to rewrite history. To them, Eliza had never existed, or if she had, she was merely a deviant, justly removed from society for the greater good. But here, in this room, in Jude's mind, she remained real and vital and undiminished. Eventually, Jude opened her eyes. The light had shifted, the room darker now as evening approached. Soon, the mandatory broadcasts would begin, the Premier's daily address that all citizens were required to view. Another hour of propaganda and thinly veiled threats disguised as patriotic guidance. The drawling speech always started with, as you know, I am better and great than anyone I know, blah blah blah. She rose to her feet, her knees stiff from the cold floor. Carefully, reverently, she gathered the items up and wrapped them in the protective cloth. Each piece returned to its hiding place behind the false panel, sealed away from prying eyes but never from her heart. Standing, Jude squared her shoulders, a physical manifestation of her renewed resolve. The fear remained, it always would, but now it sat alongside purpose, the two emotions entwined like old companions who had learned to coexist. She moved to the window, drawing aside the curtain just enough to glimpse the city beyond. The skyline remained unchanged, the same gray buildings, the same patrol vehicles moving along precisely timed routes, the same propaganda billboards illuminated as darkness fell, nothing visibly different from yesterday, or the day before, or the day before that. But something had shifted within her. Each time she performed this ritual, each time she renewed her promise to Eliza's memory, something hardened inside Jude. A core of resistance that the regime's daily assault on truth and dignity couldn't touch. She stood framed by the narrow window, her silhouette sharp against the dying light. Outside, the machinery of oppression ground onward, crushing individuality and difference beneath its treads. But inside this room, inside her mind, a different force gathered strength, less visible, perhaps, but no less powerful for its subtlety. They had taken Eliza's body. They had tried to erase her existence. But they had failed to destroy her impact, her memory, her spirit. And as long as Jude drew breath, that failure would continue to grow into their undoing. She let the curtain fall back into place and turned toward the kitchen to prepare for another night under the regime's watchful eye. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges, and new opportunities for resistance. But tonight, for this moment, she had remembered. She had honored. She had recommitted. And in a world designed to break the human spirit, that was its own kind of victory.